just ask that you be with them as they travel back today. And we're grateful that they had a weekend together as mom and daughters, and were able to get away and laugh and have a good time. God, for Nemi, we pray that you bring relief to her for the pain that she experiences on a daily basis. Just allow her to persevere and to be able to bear the pain. And we do pray that you bring relief so that she's not experiencing so much chronic pain. For Zelda as well, who has pain and who's suffering tremendously right now, we pray for her and that you bring peace to her as well. And finally, for Sarah Most, we're just grateful for her and that she's doing well. It's tough on anybody who is not even visitors, but we're grateful that she lives in a place where she has other residents that she's friends with and she's able to spend time with. That's a gift from you. God, we pray that you watch over the rest of our congregation and those who we may not be aware of, who are sick and struggling, and just bring healing to them. God, be with us as we continue to study and open our hearts and our minds. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Last week we talked about some of the great feats of Herod the Great, and we talked about his big building plans. I said if we were to use one word for Herod the Great, it would be build. Build. He was building all over the place, and he certainly caught the attention and the favor of Caesar in Rome. The Senate had made him king over all Palestine, so you had Rome and Palestine. And we talked about the big ports that he built. We talked about the citadels that he was building. And by the way, citadels were not built necessarily necessity. Citadels were built as an in case people came in and tried to open that Roman region. So King Herod had these massive building projects in every single city that he built. He was putting up the typical Roman theater. There was a temple to the Roman god, Roman baths, gymnasiums. All these things were being built in every single city that King Herod was building. We know about King Herod. When Jesus was born, he ordered that all the 2-year-old boys, 2-year-old and younger, were killed in Bethlehem. I want to talk about that today and shift gears and talk about the climate in which Jesus was born, because this was not out of the blue, like where Herod just had this burst of narcissism. Herod was losing his mind in his later years. He was becoming increasingly
recording through one of these.
He thought that there were all these conspiracies where people were plotting against him. To tolerate. Not many people liked him at the time of his death. People actually celebrated Herod's death, which is surprising a little bit because of all these big cities that he built, and quality of life overall increased. Rich people, I guess, not so much for the poor people, especially the Jewish poor people living in northern Israel. We talked about the poor farmers, and he exacted this major tax on the people to fund all these big building projects. So he's not well liked by the majority of people. They didn't like the taxes. They didn't like the extreme poverty, the decreasing quality of life for poor people, while the rich people got richer. They just didn't like it. And he was living an extravagant life. So another thing that King Herod did that he didn't really win a lot of favoritism among the Jewish people is that he weakened weakened the Sanhedrin intentionally. And he did that by favoring the Sadducees over the Pharisees. And of course, the Sadducees were, believe it or not, they were the conservative sect of the Jews. But they didn't believe in the resurrection. They caused a lot of problems. And Herod didn't like the powerful Sanhedrin because it was a ruling body, right? It was a competition. So he intentionally weakened it. He also appointed priests from Babylonia. Instead of using them in the region where he lived, he would reach into Babylonia, which he was winning favoritism there and losing favoritism in Jerusalem, and definitely Jerusalem, but all of that region. The Jewish people didn't like King Herod, and they were terrified. People, his own family, were terrified of him. He had Ananus, who was high priest, and his son-in-law, Caiaphas, eventually became high priest. And
he was the high priest who actually was ruling whenever Jesus was brought before him. So the high priest that Jesus was brought to was appointed, originally his father-in-law was appointed by Herod the Great himself. And then Caiaphas was ruling whenever Jesus was brought before him. As I mentioned, he divorced his first wife, and then he married Mariamne, a Hasmonean princess. Whenever she refused to sleep in bed with him, he concocted an idea that she must have cheated on him, which most likely was not true. She just didn't like the guy. So that one night on the couch earned her a death sentence. So he called her own mother to witness her death. He put his wife Mariamne to death, and then shortly after, he executed her mother. Josephus writes that, he's a historian, Jewish historian. Josephus wrote that King Herod would be found months after he murdered his wife. He would call out her name, and he would walk around the palace, and he would call out and be like, "Mariamne, who?" He was literally losing his mind. So, in his later years, when Jesus was born, it's not surprising that he had this abrupt decision to have all the 2-year-old children and younger murdered. So I think understanding that history is really important, but then what happened next, after his death, is even more important. There was a revolt. People saw this as an opportunity. Oh, and his parting gift on his way out, right before he died, he split up the kingdom. He didn't want his sons to take over the throne and to have the power that he had, so he divided up the kingdom into all these little subsections. And he also had some of his sons murdered, including next in line. What was his name? Who was the next in line? I'm terrible with names, and when I'm running on about 3 hours of sleep, my memory is not good. I thought I had it written down. Maybe you remember. I don't remember. His next son, who was next in line to the throne, he had murdered as part of his paranoia. So then his other sons were... Antipater. Antipater was the next in line. That was his eldest son. He had him killed. He divided up the kingdom. So you had the region of Galilee. You had Judea. You had, I always mispronounce this, Idumea. You had all these different sub-regions, and he intentionally divided them up to dissipate the power. So his one son, Antipas, was over Galilee, and we'll learn pretty quickly that some of these people were also feared. And then he had another son who was over Judea. So I'm getting ahead of myself. And I'm going to go back and look at some of my notes. I think it's important to mention, too, that from Rome, Caesar Augustus had this, he liked places that were favorable towards Rome, that were obedient toward Rome, that practiced Pax Romana, Roman peace. So if there were certain colonies where they behaved well, and they taxed the people well, and were able to maintain peace while taxing people and overtaxing and bringing in Roman troops from Rome, for those places that played nice with Rome, guess what they granted their citizens from Rome itself? Roman citizenship, right. So Tarsus was one of these places that played nice with Rome. Where was Saul born? Saul of Tarsus, right? And do you remember Paul appealing on several occasions to his Roman citizenship? You ever think about how Paul, a Jewish person, was a Roman citizen from Rome? He was not from Italy, right? Paul didn't live in Italy. Paul wasn't from Italy, so how did he get Roman citizenship if he wasn't born in Rome? They granted it to these cities only with Rome. So Tarsus was one of those, and you can probably add to this, but I'm going on memory here from many years ago, but Roman citizenship would grant you immunity from being flogged without trial, which Paul appeals to because he was flogged without being asked if he was a Roman citizen. A big no-no. That was a very big no-no. So Paul, you remember when he's flogged and he's arrested, and then Paul says, "Is this how you treat Roman citizens?" And they were like, "Uh-oh." And they tried to sneak him out in the middle of the night and quietly let him out of jail. And how does Paul respond? No. Yep. That's right. You flogged me publicly. You arrested me publicly. Let them come get me and escort me out of this jail. Absolutely, that's a death sentence. Yeah, you do not ever flog a Roman citizen without asking. You ask them first, "Are you a Roman citizen?" They didn't do that with Paul. They were reactive. They flogged him first, asked questions later, and Paul appeals to that, which I think is a great lesson for us Christians, because a lot of times, what's our theology, especially with abuse? I see this with abuse, all kinds of abuse, not just sexual abuse, but physical, verbal, emotional, spiritual. What's the first response? What's our bad theology? Maybe you guys don't have enough experience with bad churches. I see it every day of my life.
Anger, frustration.
No, the opposite. Forgive and move on. Turn the other cheek. Right? Victims of abuse are told. Jesus says, turn the other cheek. Forgive and move on. All right, what about practicality? When people are actually abused in the Bible, how do they respond? Did Paul say, like a lamb he was led to the slaughter, humble and quiet, and I'm going to follow in the footsteps of Jesus and just turn the other cheek and quietly, you're right, I'll just quietly, I don't want to raise ripples, I'll just quietly come out of jail and, I'll go on and live a peaceful, quiet life. Not at all. Right? We have a right to defend ourselves against all kinds of abuse. We have that right as humans. We have that right as Christians. And we have that right as people who live under God's foundation of righteousness and justice. And I think it's interesting, too. I've pointed this out before, but in case you forgot, did you realize that Jesus was literally struck on the cheek when he was arrested? He was struck on the cheek when he's in front of Caiaphas, Herod's guy, right? And how did Jesus respond when he was literally struck on the cheek? Anybody remember? Did he turn the other cheek? Anyone? That's interesting, isn't it? We don't even know how he responded because we're so programmed. And we use this as a cliche over and over, and we tell victims, turn the other cheek. That's what Jesus, WWJD. Jesus responded, if what I said was untruthful, why do you strike me? He called them out on it. He didn't turn the other cheek.
Which was against the Jewish law.
Yeah.
Under Leviticus.
Yeah. Pretty interesting, isn't it?
Jenny, when you asked that question, how would you handle it? I was speaking for myself. Anger, frustration.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, I'm talking about, yeah, how church leaders typically respond when people are abused. Yeah, a lot. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. They'll say, turn the other cheek, just endure it, live a peaceful life, be a peacemaker. So we teach people to get, run all over. Well, interestingly, the Jewish people were not known for doing this, right? When Herod died, they revolted again. So Jesus was born at a time where there's wild unrest again all throughout Israel. We think of this as, Pax Romana, Roman peace, and, Jesus he's born at this ideal time, and the paved Roman roads, and, these great big cities, and good transportation, and good communication, and Greek is a common language for all people. All those things are true, but Jesus was born in extreme political unrest just in his region, just in Palestine. Josephus also records that all the villages, especially in Galilee, were on fire, literal fire. And archaeologists have uncovered in Galilee, in the region of Galilee, specifically the region of Nazareth, Jesus' hometown, was obliterated. When Jesus was born, his town was wiped out. It was wiped off the map, literally. There was another town called Sepphoris that was 4 miles from the little town of Nazareth, Jesus' hometown, and Sepphoris was leveled. So do you ever wonder, why doesn't the Bible mention Jesus until he's born? We have the birth narrative, and then all of a sudden Jesus just disappears out of the scriptures, except for a brief point in Luke when Jesus was 12, and he got up in the synagogue, and he was preaching and asking questions, and then he disappears, right? He runs off. Luke records that, but other than that, there's this much recorded about Jesus' life. Do you ever find that perplexing? I've heard all kinds of people explain that away, and they're like, well, that wasn't really important to the gospel, and they were saving ink, and we have all these reasons. But I'm talking about historically. Why is there virtually nothing recorded about Jesus in a 30-year time period? He's laying super low. Super low. And he's working his little tail off, because Sepphoris that I mentioned, which is the epicenter of this revolt when King Herod died, 4 miles from Nazareth, people speculate is where Jesus was working with his father. Some translations translate it carpenter, but the literal translation of that term is a skilled worker, or a skilled builder, yeah. So, what's excuse, down the wrong chute. Sorry, guys, online. I wasn't even drinking, and I managed to get something down the wrong pipe. Okay, I'm going to put up a couple scriptures, and this is kind of interesting because Jesus' hometown was Nazareth in Galilee, but where was Jesus born? Bethlehem, which was not in Galilee. That was in Judea. So, why is there a discrepancy? And did you know that there's a discrepancy between Matthew and Luke? Matthew says that the reason they were in Bethlehem is because that's where they lived. That's where Joseph and Mary lived. What does Luke say? They were from Nazareth, and then what brought them to Bethlehem? Census. Right. So which is it? We'll talk about that a little bit. It's not a huge deal, I don't think, but it is worth pointing out. Okay, so Matthew chapter 2 and verse 22. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he, that is Joseph, Jesus' father, was afraid to go there. And being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. That's interesting, right? He's in Egypt, he fled, and instead of going back to Bethlehem, which Matthew says is where Joseph and Mary lived, he shoots up to Nazareth in Galilee. Luke, on the other hand, I thought I had it. Yeah, Luke, on the other hand, says, in those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria. And all went to be registered, each to his own town. And Joseph also went up from Galilee. By the way, Jerusalem is south from Galilee. This is not a north-south thing like we Westerners have. Everything from Jerusalem, east, west, north, and south, was going down from Jerusalem. If you were anywhere outside of Jerusalem, regardless of where it is on the map, you were going up to Jerusalem. Partly because it was literally elevated, but the biggest part was because Jerusalem was what? The center of religious worship. So you're always going up to Jerusalem. Or if you're leaving, you're going down from Jerusalem. So all went to be registered, each to his own town. Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling cloths, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. So Luke records that they went down to, or up to Bethlehem, but they were actually living in Nazareth. So there's a little bit of a discrepancy. I don't know. And it's possible that they lived in both places, or that Mary was from one place and Joseph was from the other. But to me, it's not a huge deal. That's not a deal breaker where I'm like, oh no, there's a contradiction in the Bible. Micah also says this, but you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from old, from ancient days. So this is prophesying about the Messiah that's going to come from the lineage of David in this little town in Bethlehem. What's interesting is Bethlehem has these caves, right? Did you guys see the church when you were there in Bethlehem? Okay. So you didn't get to go in the church? That's unfortunate. Traditionally that word is translated manger. There's a lot of controversy behind that one little Greek word. A lot of people argue with that. A lot of Greek scholars argue with that and say it means something like trough or compartment, or all kinds of different translations. I don't know. I'm not a Greek scholar, so I just don't know. But what's interesting is early tradition had it that Jesus was born in a cave. Bethlehem has all these nice caves. It's a little town, a little village. All the inns were full. Clearly, Joseph and Mary were familiar with Bethlehem. They knew it well. So you're pregnant, you're in pain, you're in labor. You need to find somewhere to deliver a baby right now. Where are you going to go? Probably someplace that's private, that's familiar. And so a lot of people argue, and actually the first Christians argue from way back when, that she actually gave birth inside of a cave. So the earliest Christian tradition from like the 2nd century, they built a church in a cave. There was a Christian church in Bethlehem in a cave that marked the place where Jesus was born. A lot of historians, ancient Christian historians, say that Jesus was born in a cave. There's a lot of history that shows that. Okay? So, what happened in antiquity? Whenever a Christian center was built, well, it was smashed to the ground and pagan temple was put up in its place. So that's exactly what happened in this church that was built in this cave. So then, in 339 AD, Constantine builds a church, smashes down the pagan temple, builds a church again. And Constantine, if you remember, he made Christianity the state religion, right? Everybody had to be a Christian. He builds this church in 339 AD in Bethlehem, right on the spot where they say this marks where Jesus was born. It's the Church of the Nativity. That church was destroyed. And then right about 500 AD, this was built right exactly in the same spot where Constantine built the church in 339. I got to find this bell. Pardon me for a second. So this is the replica of the church that was built by Constantine, and they built it exactly same design, same size, same everything. They built it right on the spot as the first church that was built by Constantine. That church still stands. It's the oldest church building in the world. The oldest functioning church building where Christians still meet. Christians still gather in the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem. This is inside, and it's kind of built, and there's one section inside this church building that goes down into the cave that marks the spot where it was the entrance into the cave where Jesus was allegedly born. I think that's really cool. I think that's fascinating. Whether this is the spot or not, Bethlehem is a tiny, tiny little village. It's got to be close. It's got to be really close if it's not the actual spot. There in the floor, you see the floor is kind of pulled back a little bit. They discovered not that long ago, just recently, that part of the original building, part of the original floor is still in immaculate shape. It's pristine. And so they built this metal frame around it, and they open up the boards, and they show the original building that was built in 339 AD by Constantine. So it's really cool, and you should watch a video on the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem. It's really, really cool. Okay, so I mentioned Sepphoris up in Nazareth where Jesus grew up. And this city was really interesting because Herod's son rebuilt this place. He tried to take over in Judea when his brother was dethroned. Rome didn't like his brother because there was this big revolt. And Caesar didn't like that. Because Pax Romana is the highest standard. Roman peace. There was not Roman peace. So he's removed. And Antipas wanted to take over in Judea too. Herod Antipas. You may recognize that name in the scriptures. Herod Antipas was over Galilee. He wanted to take over down in Judea, but Caesar said, He was kind of tired of their family causing all these problems, and so he said no. So Antipas was a tetrarch, which literally means over a fourth. So he wasn't even a king status. He was just a tetrarch. So he still wanted to impress the people in his region. So what did he do? He rebuilds Sepphoris, which is 4 miles from Nazareth, where Jesus grew up. So as Jesus is growing up, Sepphoris is being rebuilt from the ground up. It literally was decimated. It was leveled. So one of the things that Antipas did differently from his old man, from Herod the Great, is he got local people to build. right? What did Herod do? Herod got Roman people. He shipped them over, as well as local people, but he made these Roman cities all over the place with these Roman structures and Roman theaters and Roman baths and Roman temples. Antipas didn't do that. There's no temple, no pagan temple in Sepphoris, no Roman baths, no Roman theater. There's this little theater. This is tiny. This theater is tiny. It seats 4,000. So in comparison, and you can see there the people standing on the stage. Look how small that is. He had the paved roads. Jesus likely was building these projects. This was a massive building project. Here's a mosaic. This is called the Mona Lisa of Galilee, or of Nazareth. This is in Sepphoris. So they had these really beautiful mosaics. And actually, did you visit Sepphoris? Okay, so Sepphoris is known as the city of mosaics. It had these mosaics built into the roads and built into the walls all over the place, and they were really detailed. So it's kind of interesting. It's possible, too, that Jesus was building a lot of these mosaics, creating this artwork. It's just, I don't know. I think it's fascinating. I think it's really cool. In Sepphoris as well, there was a really sophisticated underwater sewer system. So underneath the paved roads is a sewer system. We talked about that before. This was common for Roman cities. They would have fresh water coming in and dirty water going out. So they built these underground sewer systems. So our sewer systems that we tap into, it's nothing new. For thousands of years. But anyway, Jesus is not mentioned in the Bible for some 30 years. There's a reason. He was laying very, very low. You're absolutely right. This Jewish revolt did not sit well with Rome. So Jewish people had to lay really low. And when Antipas rebuilt Sepphoris right outside of Jesus' hometown, Jesus and his dad most likely were recruited and were working in Sepphoris. Almost 100%. This is where they were spending their time. So to actually get to visit and look at some of the stuff that Jesus' own hands may have built is, I think, really cool. It's really fascinating. All right, we're out of time. We're going to pick back up in about 15, 18 minutes or so.